The void of space was cold and silent, but inside the burning wreckage of the Velthrani royal transport, everything was heat and chaos and screaming metal. Princess Karaveth could not move. A massive beam had fallen across her lower body, pinning her to the floor of the observation deck. She could smell smoke and blood and the sharp chemical stench of leaking fuel. Warning lights flashed red all around her, and somewhere in the distance, she could hear the ship's computer repeating the same message over and over. Hull breach detected. Life support failing. Evacuate immediately. She could not evacuate. She could barely breathe. Around her lay the bodies of her royal guards. 6 of them, the finest warriors the Velthrani Dominion had ever produced. They had died protecting her when the raiders attacked, throwing themselves between her and the plasma fire that tore through the ship. Now they were gone, and she was alone. Karaveth was young for a Velthrani, barely 200 years old. She had convinced her mother, the queen, to let her travel to the outer colonies without a full military escort. She wanted adventure. She wanted to see the galaxy beyond the palace walls. She wanted to prove she was more than just a princess who sat on silk cushions and listened to boring council meetings. Now she was going to die because of that foolishness. The raiders had come out of nowhere. Dorith Syndicate ships, 6 of them, appearing from behind a dead moon and opening fire before anyone could react. The royal transport was fast but not armed for combat. They had tried to run, but the raiders were faster. Karaveth closed her eyes. Her luminescent blue skin had grown dim from blood loss. Her forearms hung limp at her sides. She could feel herself fading, slipping away into the darkness that waited for all living things. Then she heard something, a sound that did not belong. A dull thump against the outer hull, followed by the high-pitched whine of a cutting tool. Someone was trying to get in. More raiders, she thought, coming to finish the job, or worse, to take her alive. The Gorith Syndicate was known for capturing high-value targets and selling them back for ransom. If they discovered she was royalty, her suffering would only be beginning. She tried to move, tried to reach the ceremonial blade still strapped to her hip, but her body would not obey. She was too weak. All she could do was watch as a section of the hull glowed orange, then white, then fell away entirely. A figure stepped through the hole. It was not a Gorith raider. It was something she had only seen in pictures and trade reports. A human. A male, from the look of him, with brown skin, dark hair going gray at the temples, and a face lined with age and weather. He wore a simple flight suit, patched in several places, and carried a plasma torch in one hand and a medical kit in the other. He looked around the ruined observation deck, taking in the bodies and the destruction. Then his eyes found her. "Hey," he said, moving toward her quickly. "Hey, can you hear me? Are you alive?" She tried to speak, but only a weak sound came out. Okay, you're alive. That's good. That's really good." He knelt beside her and examined the beam pinning her down. "I'm going to get you out of here, all right? My name's Daniel. Daniel Cole. I picked up your distress signal about an hour ago. Took me a while to find you in all this debris." Karaveth stared at him. She did not understand. The distress signal had been broadcasting on all frequencies, but they were in neutral space, far from any major shipping lanes. No one should have been close enough to hear it. "I know what you're thinking," Daniel said, as if reading her mind. "What's a human doing out here, right? I run freight between the outer colonies. Mostly medical supplies, farming equipment, that kind of thing. Not exactly glamorous, but pays the bills." He pulled out a small device and scanned the beam. "This thing's heavy, but I think I can cut through it. Hold still." He activated the plasma torch and began cutting. Sparks flew, and Karaveth felt the heat on her skin, but she did not cry out. Velthrani were taught to endure pain in silence. "You're tough," Daniel said, glancing at her. Most people would be screaming right now. What's your name? She hesitated. If she told him she was Princess Kiraveth of the Velthrani Dominion, everything would change. He would treat her differently. He might try to ransom her himself or sell information about her location to the highest bidder. She had learned long ago that her title attracted predators. Kira, she said softly. Just Kira. Nice to meet you, Kira. Just hold on a little longer. The beam fell away with a crash. Daniel immediately knelt and lifted her into his arms. She was surprised by his strength. Humans were supposed to be weak compared to most galactic species, but he carried her as if she weighed nothing. My ship's just outside, he said, moving toward the hole in the hull. It's not fancy, but it's got a medical bay, and it's not on fire. That's more than this place can say. They passed through a makeshift airlock he had rigged between the two ships. His vessel was indeed nothing fancy. It was old, battered, and smelled like engine grease and recycled air. But the lights were on, the atmosphere was breathable, and there were no bodies on the floor. Daniel laid her gently on a medical bed and immediately began treating her wounds. He worked with surprising skill, cleaning cuts, sealing gashes, and setting broken bones. Kiraveth watched him through half-closed eyes. You know what you are doing, she said. I was a medic in the military, a long time ago, he replied without looking up. Before I got tired of war and decided to haul cargo instead. Turns out it's a useful skill when you're flying solo through the outer territories. Why did you come? She asked. You could have ignored the signal. You could have kept flying. It would have been safer. Daniel paused. He looked at her, and she saw something in his eyes that she did not expect. Not greed, not calculation, not even pity. Just simple, honest concern. Because someone needed help, he said. And I was close enough to help? That's all. Kiraveth did not know what to say. In her 200 years of life, she had met countless beings. Politicians, warriors, merchants, spies. All of them wanted something. All of them had angles and agendas and hidden motives. This human seemed to have none of those things. He had risked his life to save a stranger simply because it was the right thing to do. She closed her eyes and let the medication pull her down into sleep. The last thing she heard was Daniel humming a soft tune as he worked, a simple melody from a world she had never seen. For the first time since the attack, she felt safe. 7 years had passed since the day Daniel Cole pulled Kiraveth from the burning wreckage of her ship. 7 years since she spent 3 weeks aboard his small cargo freighter, healing from her wounds and learning what it meant to be treated like an ordinary person instead of a princess. Those 3 weeks had changed her in ways she still did not fully understand. Now she sat upon the obsidian throne of the Velthrani Dominion, ruler of 47 star systems and over 800 billion souls. Her mother had died 2 years ago, passing into the eternal void after a reign of 6,000 years. The crown had fallen to Kiraveth, the youngest queen in 3 millennia. The throne room was vast and dark, lit only by the soft glow of bioluminescent crystals that grew from the walls. Velthrani nobles filled the chamber, their blue skin shimmering in the dim light, their forearms folded in poses of respect and patience. They waited for their queen to speak, but Queen Kiraveth was not thinking about politics or policies or the endless demands of ruling an empire. She was thinking about a human who had taught her to play a card game called poker. Your Majesty, said High Priest Varth, stepping forward. He was old even by Velthrani standards. His skin faded to pale blue, his eyes clouded with age. He had served her mother for 3,000 years and now served her. The council awaits your decision on the matter of the human request. Kiraveth forced herself to focus. Remind me of the details. The Human Confederation has sent formal communication requesting a diplomatic meeting. They wished to discuss a mutual defense treaty against the Gorath Syndicate. Vorath's voice dripped with barely hidden contempt. They believe they can offer us something of value in exchange for our protection. A murmur went through the assembled nobles. Several of them laughed openly. Humans, said Lady Thisra, a powerful noble who controlled 3 star systems. What could they possibly offer the Velthrani Dominion? Their technology is primitive. Their ships are slow. Their lifespans are so short that their leaders die before they can gain any real wisdom. They are children playing at civilization. More laughter. More nods of agreement. Kiraveth said nothing. She let them talk, let them mock, let them display their arrogance for all to see. This was how her people had always been. Ancient, proud, and absolutely certain of their own superiority. Once, she had shared that certainty. Before the attack. Before Daniel Cole. She remembered the week she had spent on his ship, the Dusty Horizon. She had been weak and wounded, unable to do much except lie in the medical bay and talk with her rescuer. He had visited her every day, bringing food, checking her bandages, and keeping her company. He had told her stories about Earth, about blue oceans and green forests and cities that glowed at night, about his childhood in a place called Texas, where his father had taught him to fix machines and his mother had taught him to never give up on people, about the war he had fought and the friends he had lost and the decision he had made to leave violence behind and live a simpler life among the stars dawn in return. She had told him about herself, not the princess, but the person underneath. Her fears, her doubts, her loneliness. How she had grown up in a palace surrounded by servants, but never really had a friend. How everyone in her life wanted something from her. And how exhausting it was to never know if someone was being kind, because they liked her or because they hoped to gain from her favor. Daniel had listened without judgment. He had asked questions, offered thoughts, and treated her like an equal. Not like a princess. Not like an alien. Just like Kira, a person who had been through something terrible and needed someone to talk to. And he had taught her poker. She smiled at the memory. She had been terrible at first, unable to understand why humans would play a game based so heavily on lying and hiding one's true intentions. But Daniel had explained that poker was not really about lying. It was about reading people, understanding them, seeing past the mask they showed the world. Everyone wears a mask, he had said, shuffling the cards with practiced ease. The trick is figuring out what's underneath. On the last day, when they finally reached a Velthrani outpost, Kiraveth had made a decision. She could not tell Daniel who she really was. If he knew he had saved a princess, word would spread. The story would become political. Reporters would ask questions, officials would investigate, and Daniel's simple act of kindness would be twisted into something else entirely. So she had slipped away while he was negotiating docking fees. She had left behind only a small crystal pendant, a family heirloom that had been hidden in her clothing, and a note thanking him for reminding her that kindness still existed in the void. She had watched from a distance as he found the note. She had seen the confusion on his face, then the acceptance, then the small sad smile as he tucked the pendant into his pocket and returned to his ship. He had never tried to find her, never tried to sell the story of the alien woman he had rescued. He had simply continued with his life, hauling cargo between the stars, expecting nothing in return for his good deed. "Your Majesty?" Vorath's voice pulled her back to the present. "Your decision on the human request?" Kiraveth looked out at her court. All those ancient faces, so certain of their own importance. They had never met a being like Daniel Cole. They had never experienced kindness without strings attached. They could not imagine that such a thing was even possible. "I will meet with the human delegation," she said. Silence fell over the throne room. "Your Majesty," Lady Thisra said carefully. Surely this is unnecessary. We can simply send a formal refusal through diplomatic channels. There is no need to honor these humans with a personal audience. I have made my decision, Kiraveth said. Her voice was calm but carried the weight of absolute authority. The Human Confederation will be invited to send a delegation to our homeworld. I will hear their proposal myself. Vorath bowed his head. As you command, my queen. When shall we schedule this meeting? As soon as possible. Kiraveth rose from the throne and descended the steps toward the chamber doors. And Vorath? I want full background information on every member of their delegation. Every member. Is that understood? Of course, Your Majesty. She walked through the palace corridors alone, her guards following at a respectful distance. In her private chambers, she opened a hidden drawer and pulled out a small object wrapped in silk dot. It was a playing card. The Ace of Spades from a human deck. Daniel had given it to her as a joke on her last night aboard his ship. Keep this, he had said. In poker, the ace can be the highest card or the lowest. It's whatever you need it to be. Kind of like people, I guess. We can always be more than what others expect. Kiraveth held the card gently in her hands. She wondered where Daniel Cole was now. She wondered if he ever thought about the alien woman he had saved. She wondered if he was still out there, flying his old ship through the darkness, helping strangers because it was the right thing to do. Soon, she would have her answers. Soon, everything would change. The human diplomatic cruiser dropped out of faster-than-light travel and entered the Velthrani home system. Daniel Cole stood at one of the observation windows, watching as the alien homeworld grew larger in the distance. He had never seen anything like it. The planet was dark purple, covered in vast forests of bioluminescent trees that made the entire surface glow with soft blue and green light. 3 moons orbited around it, each one covered in crystalline structures that sparkled like diamonds in the starlight. Beautiful, isn't it? Said Ambassador Lisa Monroe, stepping up beside him. She was a woman in her late 60s, with sharp gray eyes and silver hair pulled back in a tight bun. She had been a diplomat for over 40 years and had negotiated treaties with a dozen different alien species. But even she seemed impressed by the view. I've seen a lot of planets, Daniel said quietly. This one's something special. Lisa nodded. The Velthrani have been building their civilization for over 100,000 years. They were sailing between stars when humans were still figuring out fire. She paused. That's why this meeting is so important, Daniel. They've never considered humans as equals. If we can convince them to sign this treaty, it will change everything for our species. Daniel was not sure why he was here. He was a cargo hauler, not a diplomat. But when Ambassador Monroe had contacted him 3 months ago, asking him to serve as a civilian consultant for the delegation, he had found himself unable to say no. You know this region of space better than anyone, she had explained. You've traded with Velthrani merchants. You understand their customs. I need someone who can help us avoid mistakes. So here he was, wearing a formal suit that felt too tight across the shoulders, preparing to meet the queen of an alien empire. It seemed absurd when he thought about it. Daniel Cole, a man who had spent his life trying to avoid attention, was about to walk into a royal throne room. The cruiser descended through the atmosphere and landed at a spaceport outside the Velthrani capital city. The city itself was unlike anything human architects had ever imagined. Buildings rose like living things, their surfaces covered in glowing crystals and flowing organic shapes. Streets wound between them like rivers, filled with Velthrani citizens going about their daily lives. The delegation was met by a group of royal guards, who led them through the city toward the palace. Daniel walked at the back of the group, trying to stay out of the way. He was here to observe and advise, not to speak or draw attention to himself. The palace was the largest structure he had ever seen. It rose from the center of the city like a mountain. Its walls made of black stone shot through with veins of luminescent crystal. Guards stood at every entrance, their forearms holding ceremonial weapons that Daniel suspected were not just ceremonial. They were led through corridor after corridor, each one more impressive than the last. Finally, they reached the throne room. The doors opened, and Daniel felt his breath catch in his throat. The chamber was enormous, large enough to hold 1,000 people. Velthrani nobles lined both sides of a central aisle, their blue skin glowing softly in the dim light. At the far end of the room, elevated on a platform of black stone, sat the obsidian throne Dot, and on the throne sat the queen. She was beautiful in a way that Daniel did not have words for. Her skin was the deep blue of a twilight sky, marked with patterns of lighter color that seemed to move and shift like living things. She wore ceremonial armor of black metal and glowing crystal, and her forearms were adorned with bracelets of ancient gold. Her eyes were large and luminous, filled with an intelligence that seemed to pierce right through him. The delegation approached the throne and stopped at a respectful distance. Ambassador Monroe stepped forward and bowed. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice clear and strong. "I am Ambassador Elisa Monroe of the Human Confederation. We are honored by your willingness to meet with us." The Queen inclined her head slightly. "Ambassador Monroe, your reputation precedes you. I am told you are a skilled negotiator. I try to serve my people as best I can, Your Majesty, as do we all." The Queen's eyes moved over the delegation, examining each member in turn. Daniel tried to stay still, tried to be invisible, but he felt her gaze land on him like a physical weight dot, and then she stopped. She did not move. She did not speak. She simply stared at him with an expression that Daniel could not read. Was it recognition? Surprise? Something else? "Your Majesty?" said an elderly Velthrani standing near the throne. "Is something wrong?" The Queen did not answer immediately. Her eyes remained fixed on Daniel, and he felt a strange sensation in his chest. Something familiar. Something he could not quite identify. Then he noticed what she was looking at. His hand went instinctively to his neck, to the small crystal pendant that hung on a simple chain beneath his collar. He had worn it for 7 years, ever since a Velthrani woman named Kira had left it for him on a space station far from here. He had never learned what it meant. He had never found anyone who could tell him. It was just a pretty stone that reminded him of a good deed done long ago. A reminder that sometimes helping strangers was its own reward. But the Queen was staring at it as if it was the most important object in the universe. "We will recess for the day," she said suddenly. Her voice was strange, tight with emotion she was obviously trying to control. "The delegation will be shown to their quarters. We will resume tomorrow morning." A murmur of confusion passed through the assembled nobles. Ambassador Monroe looked surprised but recovered quickly. "Of course, Your Majesty. We thank you for your hospitality." The delegation was led out of the throne room by servants. Daniel looked back over his shoulder as they left and saw the Queen still sitting on her throne, her luminous eyes following him until the doors closed between them. "What was that about?" asked one of the military advisors quietly. "I don't know," Ambassador Monroe replied, "but I intend to find out." Daniel said nothing. He touched the pendant around his neck and wondered why it suddenly felt so heavy. That night, he could not sleep. He lay in his quarters, staring at the ceiling, trying to understand what had happened in the throne room. The way the Queen had looked at him, the way she had ended the audience so abruptly. It made no sense. No, it was impossible. The woman he had saved 7 years ago was just a traveler. Just an ordinary Velthrani who had gotten unlucky. She could not be the Queen. Things like that only happened in stories. A knock at his door interrupted his thoughts. He rose and opened it to find a Velthrani guard standing in the corridor. "The Queen requests your presence," the guard said. "Immediately, alone." Daniel felt his heart begin to beat faster. "Why does she want to see me?" "I do not know. I only know she asked for you by name." The guard paused. "Your full name?" "Daniel Cole of Earth, captain of the freighter Dusty Horizon." Daniel stared at him. How did the Queen know his name? How did she know his ship? There was only one way to find out. "Lead the way," he said. The guard led Daniel through corridors that grew increasingly private and ornate. They passed through checkpoints where other guards scanned them with devices Daniel did not recognize. They climbed stairs carved from solid crystal and walked beneath arches, decorated with symbols that might have been words in a language older than human civilization. Finally, they reached a door made of dark wood inlaid with gold. The guard stopped and gestured for Daniel to continue alone. "The Queen waits inside," he said. "You may enter." Daniel hesitated. His instincts, honed by decades of surviving in the dangerous outer territories, told him that something strange was happening. But he had come this far. He was not going to turn back now. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. The Queen's private chambers were not what he expected. He had imagined something grand and formal, like the throne room. Instead, he found himself in a space that felt almost comfortable. Soft lighting, cushioned furniture, shelves lined with books and strange objects that might have been art or might have been something else entirely. And standing by a window, looking out at the glowing city below, was the Queen. She had removed her ceremonial armor. She wore simple robes now, dark blue fabric that matched her skin. Without the trappings of power, she seemed smaller somehow, more real, more like an actual person instead of a symbol. "Daniel Cole," she said without turning around. "Thank you for coming, Your Majesty." He bowed awkwardly, unsure of the proper protocol. "I'm not sure why I'm here. I'm just a civilian consultant. If this is about the treaty, Ambassador Monroe is the one you should be talking to. This is not about the treaty." The Queen turned to face him. "This is about something that happened 7 years ago in a region of space far from here." Daniel felt something cold settle in his stomach. "I don't understand. I think you do." She walked toward him slowly, her luminous eyes never leaving his face. "I think you have been carrying the answer around your neck for all these years." Her hand reached out and touched the crystal pendant. Her fingers were cool against his skin and up close. He could smell something like flowers and rain, a scent that triggered a memory he had buried deep. "Kira?" he whispered. She smiled, and suddenly he could see it. The same face, older now and marked with the weight of responsibility, but still the same. The same eyes, the same quiet strength, the same woman he had pulled from a burning ship and nursed back to health over 3 weeks of conversation and card games and stories about distant worlds. "You recognize me," she said. "I was not certain you would. Of course I recognize you." Daniel was struggling to process what he was seeing. "But you're the Queen. You're the ruler of 47 star systems. You're not just some traveler who got attacked by raiders." "I was a princess then. A foolish one, traveling without proper escort because I wanted to see the galaxy." Kiraveth stepped back and gestured for him to sit. "Please, we have much to talk about." Daniel sat in one of the cushioned chairs, his mind still spinning. The Queen sat across from him, and for a moment they just looked at each other. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked finally. "All those weeks on my ship, all those conversations, and you never said a word about who you really were. Would you have treated me the same if you knew?" "Of course I would. Would you?" She tilted her head, studying him. "Or would you have been more careful with your words? More formal? More distant? Would you have taught a princess to play poker and told her stories about fishing with your father in a place called Texas? Daniel opened his mouth to argue, then closed it. She had a point. If he had known she was royalty, everything would have been different. He would have been intimidated. He would have watched what he said. He would have treated her like a princess instead of just a person. I wanted to know what it was like, Kiraveth continued. To be treated as an equal. To have someone talk to me without wanting something in return. In my whole life, you were the first person who ever gave me that gift. It wasn't a gift, Daniel said. It was just normal. That's how people should treat each other. For humans, perhaps. For Velthrani, especially royalty, there is no such thing as normal conversation. Every word is calculated. Every interaction has purpose. Every relationship is built on obligation and expectation. She paused. Except with you. You saved my life and asked for nothing. You shared your food and your stories and your kindness, and when I left, you did not try to find me or sell information about me or use what happened for personal gain. Why would I do any of those things? Because that is what everyone else would do. Kiraveth leaned forward. Do you understand how rare you are, Daniel Cole? In a galaxy filled with beings who calculate every action based on what they can gain, you simply do what is right because it is right. I have lived over 200 years, and I have never met anyone else like you. Daniel did not know what to say. He had never thought of himself as special. He was just a cargo hauler who tried to be decent to people. That was not heroic. That was just basic human behavior. But looking at the Queen's face, seeing the genuine emotion in her eyes, he began to understand that maybe it was not so basic after all. Maybe the galaxy was a colder and darker place than he had realized, and maybe simple kindness was rarer than he wanted to believe. Why are you telling me this now? He asked. Why bring me here? Because tomorrow I will stand before my council and argue for an alliance with humanity. They will resist. They will say humans are primitive, short-lived, unworthy of partnership with the ancient Velthrani dominion. Kiraveth's voice grew stronger. I need them to understand what I learned 7 years ago on your ship. I need them to see that humans have something precious, something that cannot be measured in technology or military power or length of life. And what's that? Heart. She reached out and touched his hand gently. You have heart, Daniel. Your entire species has it. The willingness to help strangers, to sacrifice for others, to do what is right, even when it costs you something. My people have forgotten that such things exist. We have lived so long that we have become cold and calculating and certain of our own superiority. She stood and walked to the window again. The Gora Syndicate is growing stronger every year. They attacked me 7 years ago, and they have only become more bold since then. They raid human colonies because they believe humans are weak and unprotected. If we do not stop them together, they will continue to spread. And eventually, they will become a threat to everyone, including the Velthrani. So this is about politics after all, Daniel said. It is about survival. Kiraveth turned back to him. But it is also about something more. I want my people to change, Daniel. I want them to remember that strength is not just about power and age and technology. I want them to see that a species barely 1,000 years old can teach the ancient Velthrani something important about what it means to be alive. And how exactly are you going to convince them of that? The Queen smiled, and in that smile Daniel saw the same woman who had laughed at his terrible jokes and complained about the taste of his emergency rations and beaten him at poker. 3 times in a row once she figured out the rules. I'm going to tell them a story, she said. A true story about a human cargo captain who saved a princess and expected nothing in return. And then I am going to show them the proof. She gestured toward his pendant. May I borrow that tomorrow? I promise to return it. Daniel looked down at the crystal that had hung around his neck for 7 years. The last piece of a memory he had treasured, even when he did not fully understand it. He reached up, unclasped the chain, and placed it in her 4-fingered hand. "Keep it as long as you need," he said. "It was yours to begin with." Kiraveth closed her fingers around the pendant and held it to her chest. "Thank you, Daniel Cole, for everything." Daniel stood and moved toward the door. Then he paused and looked back. "For what it's worth," he said, "I'm glad I answered that distress signal. And I'm glad you're doing something good with your second chance. That makes everything worth it." He left the Queen standing alone in her chambers, holding a small crystal pendant and thinking about tomorrow. The throne room was filled with more Velthrani than Daniel had ever seen in one place. Nobles from all 47 star systems had gathered for this historic meeting. The air hummed with tension and quiet conversation, and everywhere Daniel looked, he saw faces marked by skepticism and doubt. Ambassador Monroe stood at the front of the human delegation, her posture straight and confident despite the pressure of the moment. Daniel stood at the back, where he preferred to be. The doors at the far end of the chamber opened, and Queen Kiraveth entered. She wore her full ceremonial armor, black metal and glowing crystals that made her seem like something out of legend. Her 4 arms were positioned in a gesture of authority, and her luminous eyes swept across the assembled crowd with calm confidence. She climbed to her throne but did not sit. Instead, she stood before it and raised one hand for silence. "My people," she said, her voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. "We are gathered here to decide the future of the Velthrani Dominion. Before us stands a delegation from the Human Confederation, seeking an alliance against the Gorath Syndicate. Many of you have already made up your minds. Many of you believe that such an alliance is beneath us, that humans are too primitive and short-lived to be worthy partners." A murmur of agreement passed through the nobles. Several of them nodded openly. "I understand your doubts," the Queen continued. "I once shared them. I was raised to believe that the Velthrani were the greatest civilization in the galaxy, that other species were lesser beings who could never match our wisdom, our power, or our achievements." She paused and looked directly at Daniel. "Then I was taught otherwise." The murmuring stopped. Every eye in the chamber was fixed on the Queen. 7 years ago, I was traveling through neutral space when my ship was attacked by Gorath raiders. My guards were killed. My vessel was destroyed. I was trapped in the wreckage, bleeding and alone, waiting to die. Gasps went through the crowd. Few knew the details of the incident that had nearly claimed the life of their princess. A distress signal was broadcasting, but we were far from any Velthrani patrol, far from any hope of rescue. Or so I thought. Kiraveth began to walk down the steps from her throne, moving slowly through the central aisle of the chamber. Then a ship appeared. A small cargo freighter, old and battered, piloted by a single man. He picked up my signal and came to investigate. When he found me, dying in the ruins of my transport, he did not hesitate. He cut through the wreckage, carried me to his medical bay, and spent 3 weeks nursing me back to health. She stopped in the middle of the aisle, surrounded by nobles who had ruled star systems since before humans had invented writing. "That man was human," she said. "His name is Daniel Cole, and he is standing in this room right now." Every head turned toward Daniel. He felt his face grow hot under the weight of hundreds of stares, but he forced himself to remain still. "Daniel Cole did not know I was a princess," Kiraveth continued. "I never told him. I wanted to see how he would treat a stranger, someone with nothing to offer him, someone who could not reward his kindness with wealth or power or influence." She smiled faintly. "He treated me like a person. He shared his food when his supplies were limited. He told me stories about his homeworld and taught me games and listened to my fears and doubts without judgment. And when we finally reached a Velthrani outpost, He asked for nothing in return. Nothing. She reached into a pouch at her belt and pulled out the crystal pendant. I left him only this, she said, holding it up for all to see. A family heirloom. I hoped he would keep it, and he did. He wore it around his neck for 7 years without knowing what it meant or who had given it to him. He never tried to find me. He never tried to profit from what he had done. He simply returned to his life, hauling cargo between the stars. Content in the knowledge that he had helped someone who needed help. The chamber was absolutely silent. My advisors tell me that humans are primitive, Kiraveth said, her voice rising. They point to your short lifespans, your young civilization, your limited technology. They say you have nothing to offer the Velthrani Dominion. She turned in a slow circle, meeting the eyes of noble after noble. They are wrong. The word echoed through the chamber like a thunderclap. Humans have something we have lost, something we forgot long ago, buried under centuries of pride and power and certainty. They have heart. They help strangers not because it is logical or profitable, but because it is right. They sacrifice for others without calculating what they will receive in return. They face a galaxy that considers them weak and inferior, and they respond not with fear or submission, but with courage and kindness. She walked back toward the throne, still holding the pendant. The Gorath Syndicate grows stronger every year. They attack without warning. They kill without mercy, and they care nothing for honor or justice or the welfare of innocent beings. If we do not stop them, they will continue to spread until they threaten us all. We cannot defeat them alone, and neither can humanity. But together, united in purpose and will, we can end their threat forever. She climbed the steps to the throne and turned to face the crowd one final time. I am not asking you to accept this alliance because it is politically convenient or militarily advantageous. I am asking you to accept it because it is right. Because the man who saved my life deserves to have his people treated as equals. Because a species that produces souls like Daniel Cole is a species worth fighting beside. She sat upon the obsidian throne and placed the pendant in her lap. The choice is yours, my people. Will you cling to old pride and ancient prejudice? Or will you join me in building a new future, one where strength is measured not just in ships and weapons, but in the content of one's character? Silence stretched through the chamber. Then, slowly, one of the older nobles stepped forward. He was Lord Vesson, a respected figure who had opposed the alliance from the beginning. He looked at the Queen. He looked at Daniel. And then, to the shock of everyone present, he bowed his head. I have lived for 8,000 years, he said quietly. I thought I had seen everything the galaxy had to offer. I thought I knew what strength looked like. He raised his eyes to meet the Queen's gaze. I was wrong. If this human is what your Majesty says he is, then perhaps we have much to learn from his species after all. One by one, other nobles began to bow their heads. First a few, then dozens, then hundreds. The resistance that had seemed so certain dissolved, like morning mist. Ambassador Monroe stepped forward, tears shining in her eyes. Your Majesty, on behalf of the Human Confederation, I accept your offer of alliance. Together, we will face whatever challenges the future brings. Queen Kiraveth smiled. And in that smile was the triumph of hope over cynicism, of connection over isolation, of heart over cold calculation. Let it be recorded, she said. On this day, the Velthrani Dominion and the Human Confederation are joined in common cause. May our friendship last until the stars themselves grow cold. The treaty was signed that afternoon. In the months and years that followed, the alliance proved stronger than anyone had imagined. The Gorath Syndicate was crushed. Trade routes expanded. And for the first time in countless generations, the proud Velthrani began to see other species not as inferiors to be tolerated, but as partners to be respected. Daniel, Cole returned to his cargo runs, never comfortable with the fame that the Queen's speech had brought him. But he visited the Velthrani homeworld regularly, and on those visits, he always made time to see an old friend. They would sit in her private chambers, far from the formality of the throne room, and play poker late into the night. She was better at it now, better than him most days, but he didn't mind. It was enough to see her laugh, to hear her talk about the challenges and joys of ruling an empire, to know that the kindness he had shown 7 years ago had helped shape the future of the galaxy. "You know," he said one evening, laying down a losing hand, "I never expected any of this when I answered that distress signal." Kiraveth gathered the cards and began to shuffle. Her 4 hands made the motion impossibly graceful. "That is precisely why it mattered," she said. "You expected nothing. You simply did what was right." She dealt a new hand and smiled at him across the table. "That is the most human thing I can imagine." Daniel picked up his cards and looked at them. Another bad hand. But somehow, sitting here with the Queen of the Velthrani Dominion, he felt like the luckiest man in the galaxy. "Same time next month?" he asked. "Same time next month," she agreed. "Now play your cards, Daniel Cole, and try not to lose too badly this time." He laughed, and the sound echoed through the ancient halls of the palace, mixing with her own laughter until it was impossible to tell them apart. Some things, it turned out, were universal. Kindness was one of them.